Ooh,
Evening. Ah, I'm scared.
you should
How
be.
we
The
doing?
world is terrifying.
Yeah. It's really entertaining to listen to podcasts about it, though.
About how terrifying it is, or just about the world?
I don't know. There's always opportunity in chaos
Yeah. It's really
because,
fun to.
like,
Yeah.
immediately my brain went, "Oh, but well, chaos is good because current state of order is bad. So at least there's potential for change."
Hmm. Yeah.
Well,
It's.
yeah.
I've got to the point I just realized where it's entertaining in a small sense to listen to oh, Greta Thunberg type doomerism because it just sounds so ridiculous. Like, we will all be dead in 5 years. 5 years later, we will all be dead in 5 years.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm not a big fan of your peak oil hypothesis crap. But, you know,
Yeah.
I
I
put
think
that
there's
in the same category.
I think there's more nuance to that. It's
Maybe.
not a we'll all be dead. But we've had this
Yeah, I
argument
still
already.
don't. Yeah, I don't see it as a problem, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Trying to think, well, there's more dramas in the international scene, but we sort of touched on that a bunch.
Yeah, more electric cars blowing each other up.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's been happening for a while. Tesla
yeah.
robots and Israel Palestine hilarities.
Uh,
I don't know.
yeah.
Things are getting fun out there, but we're sitting down here in our little weird slice of nowhere.
It still feels like it's a waiting for something to happen phase. Like the tension's building, the insanity's building, but the wave hasn't broken, and it's not. It doesn't feel like it's about to break. It's not snapping. It's coming out in little ways.
I wonder if that's humanity's old instincts not being well fitted to modern times. That we expect things to get tense and then to break out into war or revolution.
Hmm.
War, probably, particularly given our current state, but a bit of both.
Where the precipitation point is the turning point, or we don't notice the building tension until that's started building momentum.
Or we feel the tension like we do now while things are cold and then it gets hot, as the old
Mm.
idea of Cold War. But I'm I'm trying to make the point that the war started years ago.
Mm.
We have the influence to reach within an enemy nation's borders and take actions in a way that the public doesn't see, and that the enemy nation is in a lot of ways incentivized to let the public not see.
Mm.
So while we feel like the energy is building towards a sudden breakout of hot war, in reality, we've probably been at war for like 15 years or 20.
Mm.
And we just, as the public, have been sort of, don't worry about it, here's the next Star Wars movie.
Mm.
Keep
Yeah,
paying your
the
taxes.
bread and circuses.
Yeah,
Yeah. So how do you? I'm feeling in a slightly more optimistic mood tonight. So how do you?
that's unusual for you.
We have the bread and circuses of our time, the consumer culture, the various forms of locking you into participation with the economic system,
Mm.
and the values that we're taught to pursue, the wealth, the demonstrations of wealth, the certain purchases, and so on. Just trying to think of what the underlying structure, what the value system would be without that. Like, what do you pursue in lieu of trinkets?
In lieu of what?
Trinkets, just like
Oh,
toys,
trinkets.
the
Yeah.
the car, the phone, the iPad, pod, whatever.
Uh, moral values and community.
That's hard to pin down.
Well, meaning.
Difference
Materialism
between
is a replacement for meaning, and meaning is not something that can be faked. It depends on what you think of why this push is happening. So the materialist trinket example that you're making, it depends on whether you have the sort of cynical view that, oh, it's just capitalism eating itself, and we've lost connection with God, and now we have no morality, and that means that our God is the dollar or technology. I'm not sure what I believe, but I came across a kind of funny conspiracy theory that's sort of eating me up a little bit, which was the idea that whatever deep state that there is in the Western nations has embraced this sort of anti-Western philosophy, which it has, and made it the establishment narrative in order to make pro-family, pro-strength, pro-community, pro-tradition, pro-nation the counterculture. As a way of psyoping people back into supporting the West as it moves into a war state. And the ultimate crescendo of that conspiracy theory is the idea that they had the whole Trump versus Biden thing, they kicked him out, and now he's going to come back in, but he's going to come back in having had handshake deals with the deep state and being pro-war, which he is now, and he wasn't before. And the idea was like, yes, we're anti-establishment, we're fighting the man. Now our guy's in power, and we're going to go pro-war and have connections with the deep state to bring back the sort of patriotic ideals that we had before Occupy Wall Street, effectively. Or you take the cynical view, which is actors from communist countries have infiltrated our nation, our economies, influential positions, and manipulated the public's perception to be pro-revolution, pro-communist, and anti-West. And that's infiltrated not only the majority of the population and the majority of media, companies, institutions, but also governments, governmental systems. Depends on how much credit you want to place on the hawkish pro-West people or the communist, pro-communist countries.
But both of those involve an element of assuming that people are smart enough to carry this all out intentionally, and how well it's going according to their plan, how much of the plan is working, and how much of it's falling through their fingers without noticing.
Yeah.
I think it's mainly working in the cities. Definitely.
Well, this is the question. Are the people that run our nations intelligent, or are they not? And you can't make the case that everyone who happens to run Western nations are really stupid and don't know what they're doing, but everyone who runs our enemies' nations are really smart and know what they're doing. You don't get both. It's either leaders are stupid and this is idiocracy, or leaders are smart and this is a chess game that we don't see. I don't think you get to have both, where one side is smart and one side is not.
You'd probably have a combination of dumb and smart people within the governments, but it does make sense that the 95th percentile intelligence group there, with the drive to power and psychopathic element, would strive to achieve the goal of power and be more likely to achieve some semblance of it. So
yes, or having power for ethical reasons.
Hmm.
I know that that's unlikely, and we don't think about that in the modern world because we assume that those who seek for the highest positions of power in every given nation do so for psychopathic reasons. And that's true in a lot of ways. But I would like to still have the door open for a potential possible of someone is in a power position like that because they actually want the West to succeed. Or say a person in power position in China like that is in that position because they want China to succeed and they're intelligent and they're willing to play the game. It could be both. It could be
I think
either.
there's chess on both sides mixed with drunk checkers.
I think the public-facing side is drunk checkers.
Yeah. The smart guys would
Yeah,
run
like
away from the
Congress.
public.
I think Congress is drunk checkers.
Yeah, and then
Is
the
a great
players
example.
are moved like pieces.
But but the people who are behind the scenes who are clearly running the system, I don't think they're stupid. I think they know what they're doing. And the question is, are they doing it for their own personal benefit? Or are they doing it because they actually want success in whatever game they've defined? I don't know.
Depends what they see the future state as. Like if they're planning for the future state and playing to their own advantage or the advantage of their team in that scenario, then the end game situation determines what they're playing to keep or win.
So is a good example of why I don't necessarily know which side to sit on. We see that we are in escalating tensions and that we're heading towards potentially hot global war between the Western allies and the BRICS nations. I think Russia might be more flip-floppy than we think, but we also seem to have decided they're not. Perhaps they have better intel. If that is the case, well, I think it is. I think we can all see that. There are certain things that you'd want to do to prepare your population for that. Our population is incredibly divided between people who have bought effectively communist propaganda and are anti-Western. Those people are also anti-productivity, anti-health, anti-family, anti-tradition, anti-self-sufficiency.
It's almost like they're trying to filter out the most manipulable parts of the society.
Well, this is what I'm getting at, is that all those people are in one place, and those are major cities. And people who run the major cities seem to be making them as worse as possible. And you picked up the idea, is that perhaps there's a filtering process going on here. Intelligent, successful people who are happy to work hard, who want to provide their own means, who can think for themselves, who believe in family and therefore believe in stability of a nation and tradition, are moving away from cities as much as they can because of events in the last years. If you felt that your nation would end up at war with another nation who had access to nuclear weapons, that would be a smart move. If you could get all of the most capable, intelligent, resourceful, pro-family, pro-nation, pro-tradition people out of the cities as fast as possible. Also, the anti-establishment side of the political spectrum in the West now, which is the right-leaning side, are like anti-immigration, pro-manufacturing at home, pro-closed borders, pro-strong military, pro-strong community, pro-family. If I was running a nation, I would want a nation full of people like that. and the kind of people who would fall prey to communist propaganda, I would not want in my nation.
There's another element to this in terms of how we interpret things as they're happening. How much tell you what you want to hear type filtering do you think there is between the people making the decisions and the people on the ground, so to speak, the realities on the ground? Because there are many layers of that down the social hierarchy for someone to break through if they want to actually see what's happening. And a lifetime of social conditioning, like those who end up in the higher echelons have had social filtering to conformity to the expectations all the way, like go to the Ivy League college, do this, do that, do the other thing. And the filtering seems to be being narrowed by making the bar to reach ever weirder in some senses.
Mm.
And I think that the people at the top they see it as a tool to filter out the most compliant ones, definitely, but are they using it as a tool to filter the most compliant out and encourage compliance for its own sake, or are they doing it with some secondary goal, as you've alluded to? And it's
well, the question comes down to is, okay, compliance is useful, but it's not very useful if you're a useless person. And the type of people who are highly compliant and go through those filters are not super useful.
That sounds like a right-leaning perspective on it, because the left-leaning perspective, as I understand it, of anyone can be trained to do anything. Just educate them.
Yeah, no. I do not
I'm not
believe
saying
that in the slightest.
But do they? Like the idea that that your entire identity is totally flexible in every aspect. IQ is one aspect of that that's long been pushed away as a thing to discriminate based on explicitly. It's always discriminated against or used as a form of judgment implicitly. Like, can you do this? No. Okay, you don't get the job. Can you do this? Yes. Okay, you do get the job. But
I think you have to look at the results of the system. So say the people who are running the system do believe that anyone can be trained to do anything. What are these systems training people to do?
Be compliant.
Yeah, but compliant to what? They're not training helpful people.
Yeah, that does look self-destructive.
Yeah. The people who come out of that system are inherently useless in a lot of ways, unable to think critically, unable to think for themselves, and in massive debt. You look at that institution and say, the purpose of this is to educate people. Maybe, but I'm not sure that it is. It really, really depends on what the goals of the people running that system are. And look, we're intelligent people, and I assume anyone who would listen to this is. To assume that everyone who is running the systems is of less or equal intelligence to us, meaning that we could comprehend their plan, assuming we thought of it, is a rather big leap. Now, maybe we could, if we knew what they were doing, see their plan and understand why they're doing it. But there's still a chance that they're smarter than us, and they actually have a plan for whatever goals that they have defined.
So given that uncertainty, I'm not sure if I'm circling back to the original thought because it was prominent in my head or because it makes the most sense, but we can't predict the next meta move, if that makes sense.
Mm.
But the next moves seem reasonably clear. The state of the system as it's moving and the potential movements from this location are finite and more easily worked out.
Well, okay. We'll go with what we were doing before. I'm sure you've had the statement before that a system is not what it's called, it's what it does.
Mm.
The system, the result of a system is the system's function, regardless of the name of it.
Mm.
So we can say we're in this position and all of these moves are being made. What is the outcome of where we are and where we're heading? And then we can say that that outcome is the goal.
One of the primary outcomes is wealth concentration.
Yes. I'd say temporarily, but yes.
Mm. Oh, I agree. It's not a sustainable state.
No.
Hmm. Continuation of the system, of the status quo, is almost always a goal of any system. There's a lot of evidence of heavy can kicking to kick it further down the road in the economic sphere. And I've heard in several different places that there's economic confidence is high because the financiers know that the Federal Reserve will always fix it, no matter what goes wrong.
Or attempt to.
Yeah, but they have the faith that the Federal Reserve can. They'll drop interest rates again, or they'll do more quantitative easing and drop money on the hedge funds from helicopters, metaphorically speaking. But every time they do that, the can gets heavier and harder to kick.
Do you have a collapse view of what's going to happen?
In the financial sense, yes, but that's very different to
Okay,
financial collapses are relatively regular.
Total collapse or a simple, not simple, but a depression.
Depression is more likely. I don't think it'll be a total collapse. The scale of depression, the type,
yeah.
I think globalization it's showing cracks, and this would be a massive blow to it if the current financial system were to break down. BRICS are making their own reserve currency to compete with the West, and it doesn't need to be completely functional and equivalent in order to justify the breakdown of a reserve currency, as evidenced by the breakdown of the British pound as the equivalent around the First World War period, I believe.
I don't think the United States dollar will be the standard for much longer.
Oh, it's barely worth the paper it's printed on these days, but people
and I think that that is the United States plan.
To discharge their debt by default, or by bankruptcy, essentially.
To switch off the dollar to a new currency. And hopefully not something that's currency, something that's money.
Yeah.
But there's two scenarios. Because we all see that the Western nations, the Western ally nations, though we may all pretend that they're democracies, are centrally run by some entity.
Within which there is a great deal of argument, probably. It's aristocratic.
Yeah, there's some kind of aristocratic thing going on behind the scenes that seems to be pulling the strings everywhere. The question is, are those people pro-West or are they anti-West? And if you take the anti-West statement, then the pro-West people are a bunch of underdogs fighting for control of their own nation, which will eventually result in civil war, which will break out into World War III as China effectively comes in and takes over Western nations that are weak and divided. And perhaps that's what they've fomented through their cultural hacking, effectively, of our systems. Or the people who are behind the scenes running things are pro-West. In which case they have a plan for how things are going. And my suspicion is that they're actually pro-West. Because what I see happening is Western nations swinging right-leaning in a really dramatic fashion over the next 20 years. And not like mildly right-wing, like the type of right-wing that is outside Overton window now.
I broadly agree with that. Like the specifics are harder to pin down, but yeah, that makes sense to me. Whether it's deliberate is a much more difficult question.
Yeah,
because I would have gone with the hidden aristocracy being pro-South rather than pro-anti-West, as in the bunker building.
Not very many people can. Pro-South is great, but it doesn't tend to fare very well when nuclear bombs are dropped.
I agree, and I don't think that it would be Plan A. I think that would be Plan Z, but they want it. They want if everything's covered in radiation, they'd prefer to be in a bunker.
I don't think they're pro-South that much. Well, these people have money and influence and power beyond our wildest imaginations. I don't think they have the kind of money that could buy nations. I don't think they're particularly concerned with acquiring more. I think they're concerned with power. Okay, sure, but what for? Power for power's sake is not particularly useful. Which comes back to our, okay, what is the end goal? Is it pro or anti-West? Because if it was pro themselves and they have more money than God, then they would be wanting a peaceful planet. And that's not what's happening. Because war destabilizes everyone's checking account. Doesn't matter how much gold you have in a bunker if someone blows it up or invades. Lithuania or Sweden or whatever, Switzerland is not going to be safe forever.
I think
in a world like that.
This analysis needs to include the chaos element in the sense of there's however much certain people are playing chess, they're fighting the chessboard being shaken up every now and again, or invisible pieces suddenly appearing that no one saw coming. So, and they'll probably have warning signs of half a dozen different pieces showing up, and then one shows up that they were possibly expecting or not expecting. Like the near Carrington event that we just had with all the
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was a damn
It's not a
strong
static board.
Sorry?
It's not a static board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get the instinct that there's a systemic fight for survival at play. It's not a the moves being made feel desperate. It's not the static situation, let's tweak it a little bit like this. It's not even just, it keeps shaking. Can we stop it shaking?
This is a playing for keeps scenario. The people are making moves that are ridiculously risky. And they're doing that because they know that if things are let be, that it doesn't end well.
Some of the moves, like the filtering for compliance in the military, okay, maybe, but they are reducing the military effectiveness. The military is not their main tool. It's a piece on the board, but they're trying to manipulate the system.
Yes and no, but there's also the second order effects of everything. So filtering military for compliance, great. They're doing all the work, DA hires for the military. That's obviously pretty shit. But if hot war breaks out, they're really good people to throw on the front lines because they're useless to us. And think about all the kinds of people who refused the compliance test in the military. Well, now they're out in Gen Pop. They're civilians now. They're in their local towns. They're running community groups because they're concerned about the immigration. They're organising small militias. They're organising self-governing councils. They have strong belief in the nation and community and tradition. And now they're little pods of self-defense everywhere within the nation.
It's like saying, it's reverse psychology. It's don't do this thing. No, don't do it. Don't do it. Are they doing it? Oh, good.
Yes. Well, that's the other question of how many layers of reverse psychology is there between what the public see, or which section of the public see, and what the initial plan is.
And the potential for multiple players with multiple plans.
Yeah.
Or multiple factions.
The reason why I think that whoever's running the game, there's a lot of reasons why I think that they are actually pro-West, but I think a great example lately is the Israel-Palestine thing. That out of nowhere, this big issue blew up on college campuses, and now it's like, oh, look at that. Most of the traditional players are pro-Israel, and then all of a sudden, all of the woke ideology is being cast as evil, and now that can be cast out of society like that. Because we have the magic word of anti-Semitism. You label that on anyone and they're done. I don't care how progressively, PC you are. And they're pushing it on TV and they're pushing it everywhere, and the average person looks at that and goes, no. Dumb people fall for it, sure. But they'll fall for it until they get called a name. And then they go, oh, I didn't know. And then they'll conform.
Leaving the details of that issue aside, because we're focusing on the
results,
social implications and the results.
All of a sudden, both sides of the political aisle are largely in line in pro-Western conflict.
And in the wider popular social view, I get the feeling that the pro-Palestine protests are being laughed at. And
now they're starting to be excluded. The fringes are actually getting their power taken back from them and being pushed out. It's like, you've done your job. Get.
It feels like, it looks like, possibly falsely, that a hand is being shown, that slips are being made, like the comments about this person who's been at all these protests and is basically a professional protest stirrer, where they train protesters to do this, and like the phone was dropped, unlocked, and it's like, oh look, here's this prominent journalist helping people make the signs. It's like little slip ups.
Yeah.
And like,
is that incompetence or is that plan?
That doesn't take much organising. It just takes a few moles in the mole.
Yeah, all you need is someone who's willing to be the martyr.
You don't even need that. This is someone who's
to be the martyr on TV, and then they're disappeared off into a corner with a very rich estate.
Oh, in that sense, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, we noticed that this person was here fomenting, protests or riots on behalf of what government group? They're a really bad person. We'll plaster it all over the TV, or not all over the TV. We'll say that they're great on TV, and then we'll let the online people plaster it all over over their own networks. And then the distributed system of free thinkers sees that person and goes, I see plants, I see feds. And then where's that person now? Retired, somewhere very nice with a large pile of cash because they've done their job. They don't care. They just changed their name. They don't care who.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that large pile of cash for them is like, from the people at the top, it's like, oh, we'll pay for this thing to happen.
Yeah.
Done. And it's like, it's the cost of making that cog turn a few notches. And then that's someone's life sorted with a few $1 million.
Well, the other side of this is, this would be a hot take. Reality is what it is, and you're either closer to, your perception of reality is either closer to reality or it's not, which means it either works better or it's not. And when it comes down to it, in the massive right versus left argument that we have in the political space, yes, we have these filtering systems going on, yes, we have all this agitation, but when it comes right down to it, who has the better grasp on reality and who is more likely to let's say, survive an evolutionary process. And my point with that is simply the people in charge are not stupid at all. And yes, they're setting up this division and this fighting. But if they're smart enough to play the game that they can see, as they filter people, they're going to have a whole bunch of people who are distributed and intelligent, and they're going to see these other people, and they're propping up the stupid people, and they're propping up bad arguments. They're propping up really bad arguments that anyone could pull apart. What happens when they stop propping them up?
Or show the props.
Yeah. I mean, they're propping up these socialist or communist ideals. And libtards or default people who just believe what the TV accept it, and intelligent people who are free thinking fight that. Okay, now that's counterculture, and it's gaining steam, and it's got its own political party now. It's taken over one of the old establishment political parties. But a lot of the establishment people are still there. Weird. And now they're gaining traction, and now they look like they're going to win an election, and all of a sudden the media switches and goes, you know what, all these ideas that we're propping up, here's a problem with them. Here's another problem with them. Here's something that's weird. And then you get the normie people switch over. The extreme people who still buy it get pushed to the fringes. They'll start turning and swapping sides as they retreat, effectively. Some of them will go down the ship, but that's fine. And then all of a sudden, coming into a new election year, you have a pro-Western, pro-authority, pro-tradition populace, both the anti-establishment part of the free-thinking West and the normie people believing what the TV told them, united against hostile nations. And then all you need to do, declaration of war, and the whole system runs away.
Like, there's two things that seem to be
even the Boeing thing. There's another great example. Boeing is one of our weapons manufacturers in a lot of sense. We're having a lot of scrutiny on their poor performance and poor safety. You know what they need? They need more manufacturing. They need more care. They need more resources. That would be really good going into a war scenario.
The whistleblowers getting mysteriously Epsteined.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was on the front of the news media pivoting a bit, there was the thing about a bunch of frat boys defending an American flag on a pole.
It's and they got like $500,000 to throw a massive party because people were like, oh, there's a GoFundMe to like help these guys have a party, and they wanted like $1,000, and now there's $500,000 in there.
Oh, you can imagine they saw that. Like, what the frack?
Yeah, no, I think it's still climbing. That's interesting. Who gave them all that money?
It'd be easy
because there wasn't big donations. Yes, but it could also be the populace because there's a lot of people in the West.
Yeah, we like that.
Yeah.
Or
it shows the shift in culture. Like, people are grifting towards pro-nation, pro-tradition, pro-family now.
And triple
And
truth in
that's
COVID too. Like acknowledging
mm.
that.
Didn't Chris Cuomo get hired by someone else, and now he's like all against it and coming out about it?
That
Like,
wasn't the one I saw, but it's the same thing. I saw it was a peak prosperity thing, although you said you weren't so keen on that website, so I'd be interested
I'm
in.
not a big fan of that guy.
Yeah.
But no, but even still,
yeah, the
mainstream
information
media is turning against the things that they pushed for the better part of 2 decades.
Yeah, it's
And
like COVID vaccines do cause some rare side effects, and we're not really acknowledging it. It's like, no
yeah,
kidding.
and we lied to you about this, and oh look, the woke people seem to be quite racist for some reason. Isn't that interesting? Well, look, it looks like this Republican's doing a thing, and he's not evil.
Yeah.
Like a bait and switch return around there. You're going to have pro-establishment and anti-establishment people both voting, not voting. You call it rooting for the same side, and then you have an entire nation of united people, really going pro-West. Let's go get them. Communist bad. And all they need to do is point the finger and get injured somehow.
Oh,
And then
yes,
some kind of
might be
false
just
flag. Some
unfortunate
kind of false flag.
fall, and it
No, I
wouldn't
mean,
take
like,
much. Just a slippery step.
yeah, or someone happened to strike United States soil. Not sure how that happened. And then away you go, war machine ready to rumble.
Yeah.
The military may be doing a whole bunch of weird stuff. But you know what hasn't stopped? Investment in Raytheon. That never stopped.
That's one of the arms developers, aren't they?
Yep, yeah. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. These guys have been given all the money. And you know what? They're still demoing 15-year-old, 20-year-old gear. Where's all their new gear that they've been working on for like the trillions of dollars that we've been giving them?
I think there's still a element in there of the declining effectiveness of $1 million missile blows up $10 tent. And they are thinking about that, like drone swarms and that, but who knows, they might pivot and make it cost effective, but there does seem to be a lot of pocket lining happening at the same time, dragging it down.
Well, that's true. But the second you get into a war scenario, a lot of that corruption gets cut out. Like you said before, it feels like we're building towards something. That everything's been sort of tensing and building up, and something's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think my claim is that there is some faction behind the scenes who is pro-West and wanting the West to win the global war that is occurring and has been occurring for a very long time. And that war is essentially humanity's war against communist ideals. And my contention is that they are building a hand to play, that they are getting themselves ready and have been for a long time to play a card that wins them, or at least sets things off with a bang with them in a good position.
That certainly seems plausible in so much as the worldview and planned course of events, but I suspect that chaos will play merry hell with a lot of elements of that along the way.
I think, yes, which I think is why it's taken time. But I also think I'm not sure they have a whole lot of plans after they play that first card. I think once the shot's been fired, all bets are off. And I think even they're intelligent enough to know that.
Yeah. Predicting the outcome is a very different scenario to saying, how do we manipulate it so that we're ready for the first shot?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to know what's going to happen. I mean, we're at war. We know that, but we're still building towards something else. We don't know
In
what
times
that is.
past, it's felt like a loud build-up, like a screaming rising to a crescendo. This
Yeah,
feels like increasing tension. It's like the rubber band looks the same, even if it's getting stretched further and further. Like you could ignore it because it's not visually changing, but it's getting tighter.
it feels like the rumble of an earthquake to me. That'd be my
Yeah,
analogy.
that was the image that
Like
came to mind first, but yeah.
there's like a low vibration, and the sense is there's something coming that's a bigger wave.
Mm.
And we have these sort of high frequency waves at the start that's like something's happening. And then the clap moment hasn't happened.
So on an individual level, I'm just thinking of this series of articles that I read about lenocracy. I'm not sure if I've discussed it on a previous one of our recordings. I think I might have.
Maybe, but I don't recognize the term.
The guy made up the term based on the Latin word leno for pimp.
Oh, yes, I think you've mentioned this. Yeah,
as in
go
middleman,
ahead,
ticket clippers taking their cut without really contributing anything. And as the real productive economy shrinks, you have this ever relatively larger group of ticket clippers trying to justify their existence and
middle management and rent-seeking behaviours.
And that fighting for its own survival, and then how do you as individuals respond to that? And it seems to be a common feature of our stage in a civilization. But I wonder if the sort of changes that we're discussing could lampoon a lot of that, knock out a lot of that inefficiency by the chaos.
Yeah,
How do you
a truly
yourself?
chaotic period would break a lot of the bonds, and particularly if something like open war was declared. The government would then be able to come in and enforce no bonds. There's nothing like efficiency during wartime. And as much as governments love their corrupt ability to skim off the top, the second that it matters, which is wartime, that goes away. People get shot for that shit real quick. It wouldn't take much for Western nations, once the shot was fired, to go like, right, manufacturing time. Get in the factory, make the shit that we need. And then all of a sudden, when that war is over, that's a lot of manufacturing right there.
I feel like after the war,
fireworks.
We'd still be what?
I got fireworks at my window. Sorry.
I feel like after the war, if you compared by a lot of metrics our current civilization state by size, by complexity or whatever, I think we'd still be smaller after said crisis, war, however it ends up manifesting.
I think we'd be wealthier though.
Streamlined, and what we've got would sort of be there'd be a lot of loss in the process of war itself.
A bit of a cull wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing in our state.
Hard thing to say.
Obviously, yeah, that's horrific, and it's going to be painful for those who are on the receiving end of that. But if you're going to take the I'm running a culture, I'm running a nation perspective, sometimes sacrifices need to be made. And cutting the fat is a very useful tool. And if you have a tool that can cut the fat, can change everyone to be pro your nation, pro your culture, pro tradition, pro family, and also boost the economy in a massive way, and position yourself to, when the event is over, to have a foundation for a great economy. That's really good for your culture or your nation.
There was a
war's good for business.
Yeah, there's a description of why civilizations rise and fall that I read that comes to mind, that the idea that you have a creative minority who through new insights and such, like scientists post Second World War, have answers to a lot of problems and promise more answers, and then they deliver on that for a while, but then that power structure gets ossified and can't respond to new crises. And I wonder if the behind the scenes decision makers that you're describing may, within that structure, be classified as the remaining creative minority. So they're able to creatively respond to crises, but there's not enough of them to handle things properly. So they're forced to use blunt tools like the ones we've been discussing instead of finer solutions.
Yeah, they wouldn't
And
be able to
then,
operate in a public-facing sense.
yeah, so then that would imply, by the use of blunt tools, that the solutions would also be short-term, and there would still be many front-facing problems to deal with. Those problems would continue to accumulate until a new creative and continue to drag down the system as a whole. There's all the little problems, all the little inefficiencies.
Yes, but I would also say that given the state of the West, that the average person is being, through the filtering process, encouraged to be the kind of person who could deal with those problems.
That would be good.
Okay.
Yeah. So there'd be an implication in that moving more toward the nominally discouraged, self-reliant end of the spectrum would be advantageous to the future. And even in an isolated analysis, that makes sense. I keep coming back to what that article series on Linocracy that I read was discussing in the last article about how to walk away and stop paying the cost. And that these days we've got all the trinkets, but those are as much golden handcuffs as anything else.
Yeah.
That we've, just like in ancient Rome, the population were kept in, what would be the right term? Docility by bread circuses and orgies. There were groups who just politely said no thank you to that. The various philosophers, and there were lots of different branches, and the Stoics are one of the more memorable ones in today's recent memory. But they would just say, no, thank you, I'm doing this instead. And because they'd refused the bribe, they couldn't be controlled by the threat of taking it away.
Yes.
And so we're in a similar situation with the gizmos and signs of affluence that we purchase.
Entertainment.
Yeah, like how many entertainment services and systems these days do you buy, and then you're not just stuck with cost of that, but you've got the essentially rental cost to maintain the service, and you don't even own the product you bought anymore. It's the buy nothing and you'll be happy.
Well, unless the intent for us to rebel from it.
Yeah. It's like, give us something to fight back against.
These are massive inefficiencies in an economy.
Hmm.
So if you're pro-state, then you look at people spending their money on entertaining or pleasuring themselves with gadgets or movies or whatever else. And you go, wow, that is a massive amount of economic activity that is pretty useless. It's not making our people stronger. It's not making them smarter. It's not making the state much more money. It's not making the nation or the culture more healthy or productive. Now, if you could remove that, obviously I'm going into conspiracy theory here, but that's sort of the whole point of this episode. If we were to give credit to whoever is playing games behind the scenes, what could we see as the motivation for their actions if they were a benevolent actor? All forms of entertainment have been made progressively worse in every sense of the word,
Ooh.
to the point where they're injected with such, well, the injection of the same communist ideals that if you were pro-West state person you would want to reject into all of these things would make the people who are being filtered out of the cities, for example, want to filter out of that too. Why would I sit around and watch TV? It's just woke garbage. What'll I do instead?
Mm.
Something productive.
Just from sheer boredom, which is the
Mhm.
developed evolutionary pathway.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
bored. What'll I do?
we have the
I'll
bread
build
and
something.
circuses. We're sitting around like this, looking at our phone, watching a movie or something. Now, if we make the interaction of staring at the phone really shit, or watching a movie really shit, or playing games really shit, the people who have respect for themselves and their time are going to decide that they don't want to do that. And they're not going to want to invest in getting nice tech that's really expensive, that's really good at displaying an image,
Mm.
which is not a technology we really need to push forward in terms of advancing the state.
Mm.
What are they going to do instead? Well, they're the same people who filter themselves into the country. Okay, perhaps they'll invest in self-reliance. Perhaps they'll invest in their community. Perhaps they'll get busy and have another kid.
You don't need to take someone from one end of the spectrum to the other. You just need to move the needle, and the bell curve shifts a little bit.
Yep, and the aggregate moves.
Mm.
All you need to do is shift the average 2 or 3 points, and the whole society changes.
Mm.
If the whole country is 51% left, 49% right, you're a left country. All you need to do is shift it a little bit, and all of a
That's
sudden the average weight's on this side.
That's if you're restricting it to just a left-right divide instead of a far more multi-dimensional analysis.
I'm using those as proxies
Mm.
for the kind of filtering we're talking about. The kind of, yeah, the party of the right these days is more just not that collective.
Mm.
And it's getting more and more not communist everyone else.
Mm.
And if that progression goes along, and all of a sudden the state narrative switches to, we are not a communist country, the CCP is a communist country and they're evil, and these people who are communist in our nation need to be excommunicated, then all of a sudden you have the not that political party being, instead of being I'm right, not left, it's I'm American, I'm Western, not communist.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden that finger pointing is shifted outside the nation.
Mm.
Great setup for war if you're wanting to go to war with that nation.
Which is very much
particularly if they do something like invade Taiwan.
It's the type of unnuanced approach you need to use for sort of population manipulation.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and obviously these things would be multimodal. That's not the right word, isn't it? A multi-factor approach.
Mm. I'm also thinking, like, we've got this analysis based on the assumption of someone playing chess behind the scenes, but a lot of it's still applicable even if the guy behind the scenes is drunk or doesn't really know what he's doing. Like, we see certain things happening, and it's like, well, this is moving in this direction, and this is a probable result. So even if you can't see the guy behind the curtain, even if the guy behind the curtain isn't there, you can see the scenario and how it's playing out, and the woke situation's steadily continuing on as a circular firing squad. And
That's useful.
that was long predicted.
Yeah.
The trans issue, in the sense of trans surgeries on children, that's coming to its natural death amid a steadily growing flurry of lawsuits.
I shouldn't laugh, but I always get the quote of abortion in my head when I think about that.
Mm.
though I don't remember the situation, but it's like, are you pro-choice or pro-life? It's like, well, I'm not a big fan of killing babies, but they're communist babies, so I don't know. They're your babies. They're not mine.
Oh.
Like, you know what? It's really advantageous to get the ideology that you want to root out of your nation to murder all their own children or sterilize them.
That is
okay,
terrible. Well
that is
done.
that. Yes, it is. But if you saw that the communists had influenced your culture, taken over universities, and gotten a hold of the mainstream narrative, and you wanted to flip that, a really good way would be get all of those communists to not ever have kids, climate narrative, to kill the kids that they accidentally have, abortion narrative, and then the ones who make it through that filter to sterilize them. Trans narrative. Like, boom, 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 boom. 3 filters right there, and any who make it all the way through that and say the post-trans adults are going to be radicalized back away from that ideology that damaged them anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, it's...
That is the result of those choices.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's someone behind it.
Yeah.
But that seems rather convenient if you were pretty anti, that ideology. Just, it always reminds me of that Freedom Tunes bit with Biden actually being really competent and intelligent and ridiculously traditional and Christian. And then every time someone comes up to him, he's like, well, we had this idea for expanding abortion rights. And he's like, oh, you're not going to have any children? Why should anyone else? Sure, let's do that. Why are you doing this? Because I'm wrong. Because nothing bad will happen, and they'll never learn. Sabotage.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. Maybe this is me having a large amount of copium, wanting things to work out right, but I could see someone playing this game and winning with the moves that are being played. And I really want our team to win, because I know that if we don't, it's going to be a very dark future. And I would like my kids to have kids of their own, by their own choice.
So on an individual level, which is what it's always good to bring it back to.
The West better win, because we've seen what the CCP does to other racial groups that they don't like. And it's not something I want to have happen to my children or my wife.
It's been interesting getting a Chinese girlfriend recently. Hearing the common person perspective on the CCP. It's like there's a fundamental perspective difference on it, not just in the recent sense, but in the 5,000 years of history under various empires. Various emperors who all had squabbles, and some were bad, some were good, and so on. The large attitude of, I'll wait for the bad one to die because he's too hard to overthrow. If he was easier to overthrow, like it was less overbearing surveillance, then that'd probably happen. But it's rather difficult. So it'd have to be a mid-level governmental revolution or top-level governmental revolution where they can get away from that flying, or they just wait for him to die. Sorry?
Like Stalin.
Oh, is that how he got taken out?
No, he just died, and then the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah.
Because the people never wanted it, but they were under such a strong vote, effectively.
Yeah.
And when you have one supreme leader, when the one supreme leader dies.
Yeah. The Chinese culture is used to having an emperor, a dictator in the modern parlance.
Yeah.
So there's a large tolerance for, oh, this one's annoying, and like the Xi Jinping changing the rules so he gets a lifetime term instead of just a 4-year term or whatever. that's they're going back to that business as usual instead of the new limited term system. Oh well, that's annoying.
Well, yeah, annoying is a hell of a word.
Yeah. And there's
But I see how he appeases his own people.
and I'm misrepresenting parts of this through ignorance, but there's also
Well, you got to remember the racial problem here.
hmm,
As much as in the West we like to make the claim that it's not okay for one race to want their own race to succeed.
hmm,
A Chinese person who, even though living under a Chinese communist dictatorship, does not necessarily want Western white ideology to win over their people, because they're going to want to choose their people. That's just how human beings are.
Yeah, if someone
They
has to be
want
the
their
last one
people,
left, I'd rather it was me.
exactly. They want their people to have their place in their nation and their things.
Hmm.
And that's fair. And effectively, I think that's the concern that most of the Western people have had with the communist ideology. It's not like they're being all communist over there and they're killing their own people and committing genocides and stuff. But we don't really seem to care that much. And that's mostly because it's not happening to us. But say they showed up on our homeland soil, that would be a very different story. And as much as we may be a bit hawkish, not we, but Western people can be a bit hawkish against governments like the Communist Party, or even Russia for that extent, which is a bit of a weird one. The Chinese people are going to want Chinese ways of life to succeed. They don't really want to just become Western people because they want to have their own identity.
Yeah, distinguishing Chinese from CCP.
Yeah, and they may want their leader to die, and they may want the communists to go away, and West Taiwan or East Taiwan to take over West Taiwan again.
I'm not sure of those sort of details, but it's.
I'm making the joke that that China is West Taiwan being occupied.
Yeah. Because Taiwan is what China was.
Taiwan is China.
Yeah.
And China is the CCP. Which is funny, which means China is actually an ally of the West. But the CCP is the enemy. So in a certain sense, we're pro-China. We're just anti-communist.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair. Perhaps that's interesting, actually. Perhaps that is why the West feels so comfortable in going into Western nations to give them our way of living. Or white nations, let's say that, if you're going to make the racial claim. They seem perfectly capable and comfortable with taking over Germany and being like, nope, you're going to do what we tell you to do. Twice. And Russia now as well. These are they're white nations. We're not particularly comfortable with going up to someone like China or India or Pakistan and being like, you do what we say. I suppose we did try that a bit in the Middle East, so kind of an argument, but I don't know. I wonder if there is something there. As much as we all want to pretend that the whole the racist thing.
Well, there does
people are
seem
pro
to be...
themselves and they see themselves in other people, which means that Chinese people will be pro-Chinese. They're not going to call out and say, please come and conquer us, Western people, and kill off a large amount of us and make us like you. No self-respecting Chinese person would ever want that. And the same goes for Western people or Indian people or whoever.
From my own perspective, that kind of process of one culture supplanting another one is tragic in its own ways. Like, the diversity of different viewpoints is immensely valuable. And like, just like that, you've got the sovereignty of every individual having the right to live their life as they choose according to their life choices. You have the same thing on a larger scale with each culture having the right to pursue their own values. If they start trying to beat up other cultures and force them into doing them their
Yeah.
way, then
Well,
America's
I
done a lot
think,
of that, China's done a lot of that. No one's
I think,
innocent in this game. Everyone's
yeah,
ancestors.
and in our soul, we know that that's not something we want to have happen to us,
Mm,
regardless of
yeah.
how many people beat the drum about how not racist they are or whatever. The idea of some other culture coming in and taking over by force is something that makes men very angry and women very scared,
Mm,
regardless of what color skin the aggressor has or the defendant has.
mm,
It doesn't matter who's the perpetrator and what historical context. It's not something that anyone's okay or comfortable with.
mm.
Not something anyone wants to have happen, which means we will always have nations based upon racial lines. That's not something we can change
There's a
unless
racial element to
things
it,
blend to the point. Well, yeah,
but okay. I'm just remembering something I heard, I can't remember precisely where, about if you take different people and what was it? People will treat someone who looks different to them but sounds the same,
yeah,
and so has the same dialect, the same inflections showing that they grew up in a similar area. They'll
yeah,
go for that person over someone who looks the same and sounds different.
yeah. That's
So
why European nations fought so much, even though they're all white.
yeah,
Like there was a lot of war in those years, and that was pretty much all right there. Another great
yeah.
example, I suppose, would be Africa. It's not a very
Mm.
peaceful place, even though they're all the same race, if you want to make that claim.
So it's almost linguistic rather than racial.
It's cultural.
And then the linguistic differences are a cultural marker. Like if you speak the
Yes.
same language with the same inflections, you are drawing from the same cultural database.
Well, that's why the states fight so much, even though it's a verbal fight, a peaceful one.
Mm,
Peaceful one
for now.
for now.
Mm,
Hopefully, going forward. I mean,
mm,
they're doing segregation again
mm.
by cultural identity.
Yes.
Yeah, which is why it's a great system.
Mm,
It'd be kind of good if the rest of us could do that. But then again, I don't particularly want the UN in charge of the planet,
mm.
nor even the federal government of the United States. Although I'd be sooner to vote for being a state than giving authority to the UN.
Mm. I don't
You
see
know,
things going that way. I see them breaking down
no,
slowly.
no, I don't see them going that way at all. But I'm sort of, you know,
Mm.
if there was a choice,
Yeah.
I think it'll always be a world of lots of different groups with their different interests negotiating and fighting and negotiating.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We humans are an argumentative and quarrelsome lot.
The utopia will never come, and
Yeah.
that's what it means to be free.
Mm.
You can't have free thinking, conscious individuals if there is some end point where they all agree and get along. That's not how that works. What was the thing of man is not a piano key. It doesn't matter how perfect the system you make, men will break it. Women too, no. Because all we want to do is to prove that we are not a pre-programmed entity.
Mm.
And we have a choice. And if you make the perfect system where everything can be peaceful and happy and everyone can always be happy, and all we ever need to do is agree, men will turn around and say, nah, I'm not going to agree
Mm.
because I am conscious and I am unique and I make my own choices.
And I choose.
And I choose not to. Yeah. And
If
that's
only for that reason.
That's consciousness. That's what it means to have conscious choice. Which is, we go metaphysical, it starts knocking on the door of, okay, maybe we are the only ones.
What do you mean? The only conscious beings?
Yeah. I'm talking about the Fermi paradox, effectively. So there's like 2 or 3 effective scenarios. One, conscious life does evolve all over the place, but due to limitations in physics, species can colonize their local area through other conscious entity, but will never end up reaching other conscious entities because they're so far away. Assuming that we don't, break through physics. Second one is there's some kind of galactic civilization out there that's peaceful, in which case it doesn't sound particularly free will to me. I don't think that you can have free will and peace. And then the third option is, suppose there's 4. The third option is that there is free will and things do connect, which means not peaceful all the time. And there's fighting and stuff going on out there and they don't particularly care about us at this point. Or the fourth option, which is the sort of traditional religious view of we may be the only one, in which case there is something very special and spiritual happening here when it comes to our choices.
Well, there's also
perhaps
the
there
dark
is
forest.
Something else watching.
The idea that if you go into a forest that's full of life and you know it's there, but none of it's making any noise, there's predators around.
Yes, the Fermi paradox problem of perhaps there's a great filter that though many things may pop up all over the place, they don't make it through whatever it is. There's is it the dark forest? The one I heard was you're in a city and all the lights and all the windows are out, but you have yours on. And that's sort of the human version of the dark forest with a predator. It's like there's a whole bunch of empty windows out there. They may not be empty, they may be full, but none of them have their lights on except you. That doesn't seem safe.
My take on it is that civilizational progress is not linear because a lot of the Fermi paradox is based on the idea of continued growth and progress, and in a material sense. So further expansion through space, further growth of technology and communication ability and dominion over the planet.
You think that most, or if not all, civilizations do not progress beyond what, type 1?
Yeah. And it's cyclical.
That is just peak, trough, and you just end up staying on the planet forever.
Yeah. And so, like, we've got...
We make it to the moon this time round.
Sorry?
Hey, at least we made it to the moon this time round.
Yeah. We've got the 100, 150, about 100 years of radio transmissions powerful enough to be worth detecting in space or from another star. So that's a 100 light year band propagating out. If that lasts another 50 years, that's a 150 year long blip for another civilization to reach the point where it can detect that across the 100,000 light year width of the galaxy. That bubble will slowly go out, getting thinner and thinner or dimmer and dimmer as it goes. How far does it go out before it's undetectable? Say halfway, which seems optimistic. And then you've got... It's not much probability of detection if you look at the period during which we would be able to detect such radio waves, which let's assume similar timescale to the ability to produce them.
Or switch it to light, even. You make that case, so we look up and we see a universe of empty windows with the lights off. Like, okay, that planet over there, how many millions of light years away is that? Which means how many million years ago? You know, we've had lights for a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
In a meaningful way that can be seen.
And the ability to detect them, even now, it would be a few nearby ones, very nearby ones we might be able to pick out through spectral analysis. And you can pick out, you could pick it out through spectral analysis of the atmosphere. So you watch the spectrum of the star as we eclipse it, of the sun in our case, but if you watch the star as the planet eclipses it, you'll get the spectrum of the star, and then you'll have the dip in brightness of the star as the planet goes across in front, assuming the alignments all work out perfectly for that. And then while the eclipse is occurring, you get the spectrum of the atmosphere. It's a tiny trace amount of light, and so you can see a little blip of evidence of what's in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And first off, that can tell you if there's life, like if the atmosphere is not in chemical equilibrium, like methane and oxygen existing in the same atmosphere.
This is assuming that no civilization has progressed beyond our physics.
That's true.
Yeah.
Or have developed entirely different physics. Well, we've progressed down
you
a
mean
certain path.
in a different path within the totality of what physics could hypothetically be?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we could detect life on another planet by the atmosphere spectra. We could detect intelligence, or at least physically manipulating life by chemistry of the atmosphere being weird. Like, we only know of artificial ways to make this chemical. But even then, the time period over which that would exist, the chance of detection, it's like the Fermi paradox doesn't seem paradoxical to me.
No, not really. I think it rests upon the assumption of other civilizations having broken through physics barriers and then happening to rock up on our doorstep for some reason through coincidence.
Or
which we have kind of evidence for anyway.
Mm.
Not hard evidence, but enough to indicate that maybe that's happened, or maybe that's secret weapons.
Yeah, in that sense, well, there's both, I think, but that's
okay. So is that what you believe?
Okay.
Both you
if
think?
we go into what I believe, based on a bunch of data points, which is like, okay, here's my best guess. Not my original idea, of course. Yeah, nice thing to round out the show with. Our civilization has followed a particular path of development, and even if you look in Earth's history, each civilization is uniquely creative in the direction of development it goes down, and it's unpredictable. Like what's an artist going to come up with next is just as predictable as a true artist, not someone who's mass producing something.
Someone who's pushing the boundaries. You don't always push on the same boundary.
Yeah, and different civilizations push on dramatically different boundaries.
Yeah, if you had a great example, I think, would be analog computers. If you had a civilization that never went the digital computer route and always stayed analog, you would have a very different society that could still be ridiculously technologically advanced.
Yeah, exactly. Or entirely different forms of computing, the Mentat route rather than the artificial computer route. So on. Like honeypot ants of the brain. But so there's the evidence you referred to of encounters of something that do not appear to be mundanely terrestrial. They also do not appear to follow physics as we know it. There's a question which is insufficiently asked of, are they following the same laws of physics to start with? Like, we've got various forms of parallel universe theory, right?
Oh, you mean Like they're different dimensional entities.
Yeah,
Is that what you
yeah,
mean?
like super terrestrial rather than extraterrestrial. And then the whole thing just blows out in possibilities from there. And so it might be a very
You
busy
see that as
universe.
separate. You see that as separate from physics.
I see physics as we currently understand. So, okay, there's physics as we currently understand it, and that's sort of
Oh,
box, and there's the potentials that we've poked at from there. And this is a separate thing.
do you include spirituality as a part of physics,
I
or do you
would.
believe it's beyond physics?
Okay, the first impulse that came to mind, which didn't pass quite the logic or cohesiveness test, was that that's an umbrella thing that covers everything, but that's a perspective view. Like you can bring it all together. Spirituality in the metaphysics sense of, okay, here's how these things that modern physics ignores can be found to work if you watch them closely. That would be metaphysics in the schema I'm working with in my head now. And
Oh,
that
we need to
metaphysics
define
is what.
physics. I think you
Mm,
and I mean different things when we say physics.
yes, let's go down this rabbit hole a little bit.
Okay. From what you have said, I assume that you mean, when you say physics, you mean current physics.
What's found in universities and textbooks today, and
Right.
the
When I
speculations
say
thereof.
when I say physics, I mean the laws of the universe
As
in
they
all
truly are,
facets.
rather than
Yes.
how we see them. Okay.
Yes, that there is physics, and then there is understood physics.
Hmm.
And so for the spirituality example, my mental model is, though we may not have proven the laws, it is likely to be that there are other dimensions, one of them perhaps being a spiritual dimension, whatever that may mean. And your reference to the ET, whatever things, breaking
Deliberately vague.
physics. And then you said that they were like extra physics or outer physics. To me, that is within physics. We just don't understand it. That physics is the source code of the universe, and we only know a small amount. But what we know isn't what physics is. What physics is what it is.
Yeah.
What we know is just our interpretation.
I think I'm taking my definition internally of the word physics from the root physical, as in it's the understanding of the physical that we've gained through centuries of effort.
Our understanding, rather
Yes.
than the thing itself.
Yes.
Right. Well, yeah, there's a disconnect. I don't see it that way.
Whereas metaphysics is kind of a tag on to
Yes,
broaden it.
I understood metaphysics from my. This will be a difference in our upbringing because of your father and because of my grandmother being the influences on our lives. I was raised in metaphysics first, and that was my base worldview before I started interacting with actual physics.
In the academic sense.
Yes. So to me, metaphysics was my physics, and then I started interacting with what we know as people, what we call physics. And in my mind, that's like, oh, okay, that's what we understand of physics so far. But actual physics is sort of what really is, and we try and hypotheticalize.
Abstractize?
Guess. Yeah, it's like mental models that aren't proven,
but are useful. We steadily work on making them better. Sometimes with lots of dead ends.
Yeah, that's weird. I guess my interpretation of physics is less about the actual mathematical rules. Perhaps because I don't understand them that well. And more about what things are and how they interact.
Mm.
Weird. I was raised by hippies.
Yeah.
You're an engineer.
Yeah. So if we use the naming convention of physics is what they have in textbooks and what they hypothesize they might be able to add to the textbooks in the future, and metaphysics is that inclusive of the underlying source code, so it's the open-ended all that is,
I'll
then
go with that. Yeah.
yeah, within the physics defined realm, the
Oh,
universe
defined
as
physics. I like that.
yeah, within
Defined
the
and
yeah, within that region we seem to see an empty universe.
yes,
If we expand out to the metaphysics perspective, we
things look
have,
busy.
even just on Earth, it does not look as quiet as the defined physics version. Like encounters with beings that do not follow the same rules as we do for millennia.
It looks pretty busy
Mm.
for the metaphysics side of things. Yeah.
And then this is more anecdotal, but I've heard that people with some degree of clairvoyance can look at the sky and, oh yeah, that's not as quiet as it looks with just normal eyes. That is more anecdotal, but it's apparently something that you can see once you get astral vision going. But that's very
Yeah.
metaphysics for this discussion.
Yeah. I hesitate to say things like that publicly.
Mm.
I have my experiences and what I have seen, but it feels very, like self-congratulation, kind of.
Mm.
Look at me, I can see I've seen this thing, aren't I so special?
Oh, I definitely can't.
It feels a bit weird to. Yes, even I'm very hesitant to even say that. Yes, I have had some form of metaphysical experiences.
Mm.
Even that feels a bit like, oh, aren't I so special? Given the, well, I suppose the intellectual nature of our conversations. Much as I enjoy congratulating myself, I don't really feel like doing it on the internet.
Yeah. We reserve the right to be wrong.
Oh yeah, like I said, I was not raised by engineer mindset people.
Mm.
I was raised by spiritual, metaphysical people. And that was their perception of the world. And through that, I adopted a lot of it. And I do wonder to which degree your perception of reality is defined based upon what perception of reality you are given as an early child. The thing that my grandmother used to say about a lot of what we see is defined by. She used to make the comment that children or infants see a lot more than we do. This was the theory, at least. And through the act of kids pointing at something and asking, what's that? And then the parent answering, it culls it down into the defined reality of what they see. So I guess the idea would be like, child sees both physical and metaphysical, and they point at something over there, and the parent says, that's a wall. And in their brain, they say, oh, the thing I'm supposed to be focusing on is the physical object over there, not the whatever I see in between it. Obviously, that's a very hippy-dippy way of seeing the world. But as an example, perhaps there's a way in which the frame of reference from which your parents have influences. Something's happening on my phone. I might need to go. Influences what you see as you grow up in the world. That's very hypothetical for me. I'm not a big fan of the reality is interpretable rather than objective ideas. Bit of a square for me to circle for me to square, isn't it?
Well, I think
I'm
that
very hippy dippy, but then I've ended up being this very conservative person,
I think
and
we
those
are
things are very in conflict in a lot of ways.
we are fundamentally incapable of seeing the objective. And so we always have an interpretative structure, even just down to the biological nature of what frequencies of light and sound we can perceive,
Mm,
and the impulse, the forms of reaction that that triggers in the brain. And I think that the cultural pattern that we get for interpreting whatever extra senses beyond the mere physical ones we may have, the cultural pattern is your starting point, and you can develop different culture or take in different cultural perspectives and learn to see things different ways. But I think you do start with that, and growing beyond that can be difficult.
yeah. Let's leave that open. I feel like there's
Hmm.
something there, but can't quite put my finger on it at this moment.
Yep. Well, till next time then.
Till next time. Keep an
Yeah,
open
then.
mind.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.